If you find a nut that is swollen, no matter how small it is, it's only been 24 hours since I started scouring for nuts here because it's weeks early. If you didn't watch this video, find out there. And I found 3 nuts so far in the first 24 hours, and they're all small. The first one was the biggest, and the second and third were smaller. But even the smallest of the 3 is still viable. I have sprouted and grown trees from nuts as small as the smallest that I've gathered so far. If the nut is smaller, then it's going to have more difficulty in sprouting, and it's going to have more difficulty in surviving after it sprouts, and it's going to grow slower, and it's going to have more difficulty surviving the first summer. And this is critical information. The first summer of any chestnut tree that you have sprouted in your home, or in a greenhouse for that matter, is going to be a challenge no matter what. One of my healthiest sprouts from this spring may have died. I'm not sure yet. I'm still trying as hard as I can to rehabilitate it. But there's another one that was a little stronger, and it got whacked by the sun. Sometime in July, it just gave up and dropped all of its leaves. And it's starting now, in October, to make new leaves. And so maybe we'll be lucky and there won't be any frost. There's none in the long-term forecast. That could change at a moment's notice. The wind just has to change direction and come from the north. But I'm going to be vigilant for this one little one. And it's so small that it'll be easy to protect it from an overnight frost. This is a tip I'm sharing with you now. When they're small like that, just take a glass jar and put it on top of it overnight. And that'll be like a miniature greenhouse, protecting it from the frost. And so, with that kind of care, I think that that one is going to make a full recovery and be vibrant and growing nicely next year. So, going all the way back to the beginning about our lucky viewer who has a chestnut tree and they found one that was viable, you may find more if you do what I did here. I don't know, I'm assuming from what I remember of your message that it was in your yard and not in a forest. But for those of you who have one in the forest and you may be under the misguided notion that it's not producing viable nuts because there's no others around and all you've ever seen are these flattened ones and not a nice round one. That doesn't mean that there aren't any. It just means that you have to look harder. And I'm here in the middle of the forest and I've cleared this area year after year. It takes me more than a day to meticulously groom the area, get rid of little trees that have sprouted because it's almost like grass. There's so many little trees. And so I clean everything, cut everything short, expose as much of the soil here as possible without damaging the roots or the mycelial network or anything like that. But that way I can see what's happening. And each time that I'm here looking, I'm cleaning off fallen leaves. I'm cleaning off any of the sterile nuts that have fallen and all of the husks that have fallen to make it easier to see anything new that fell. It takes a lot of effort, and you have to check many times a day because the squirrels, and the red squirrels especially, and the chipmunks, otherwise known in the United States as ground squirrels, they are constantly vigilant. And so you have to outcompete them. Because, believe me, they're going to find any viable ones that fall. And we're talking about a very small number. When you don't have another tree cross-pollinating with it, you'll be lucky to find that one. But if you really work hard, and if your tree is big and producing an incredible amount of sterile, mainly sterile nuts, statistically, possibly all sterile, but out of that 1,000 sterile nuts up there, you might find 10 if you found them all. I think that that's probably a good approximation in terms of how many I find each year. It's probably 1%. So you're going to have to look through hundreds, because remember, you're not the only one looking. You're going to have to look through hundreds of sterile ones to find one viable one. But do it. If you really love that species and you want to help propagate it, then this is what you do. And as for your sprouting, the key is, the reason that it got moldy is because it was too wet and there wasn't enough airflow. That's what makes mold grow. And lack of light, but don't worry about that. You don't have to worry about lack of light. I sprout mine in the refrigerator every year, and I've never had a moldy one, ever. And what I do is very simple. I've outlined it in other videos. Again, just look at the whole series and you'll find all kinds of tips. I just use sawdust from my own pines, almost entirely red pine. In fact, I'd say virtually all, because it's very rare that I cut any other kind of pine. And so if I'm working, making a board or something, I just move my table saw after I'm finished, and there will be a beautiful mound of sawdust from the red pine. Pine is a good tree to use. It's probably one of the best because it has that resin in it. And that resin acts as a natural delay for any kind of growth. And that's our goal. Your goal is to delay the development of these chestnuts that you're sprouting. Because if you just immediately, if you just chilled it so that it thinks that winter has passed for I don't know how long, I'm only guessing, but let's say a week or something like that, maybe a few weeks, long enough for it to be convinced that it has handled a winter, that it went dormant, and then you just immediately planted that in a pot, it will grow. It will grow before winter even begins. And you know what the problem there is? It's going to grow beautifully over the winter in your sunny window or whatever, and then it's not going to know what season it is. It's important for them to sprout as close to spring, the actual spring, as possible, because you're going to be putting them outside in nature. You're not going to grow a 100-foot tree inside your house unless you live in a spectacularly big house. Can I move in with you and we'll grow lots of chestnuts together? So you want it to grow as close to actual spring as possible. And it's great for that. And it's also, because of that very same factor, it actually helps to prevent the formation of mold. Don't soak it, but you don't want it to be dry either. Remember that the refrigerator is a natural dehumidifier. That's what it does. But that's when something is completely exposed. If you had it in an open jar with no lid on it at all, and you didn't add water every, I don't know, couple of weeks, just a little bit to dampen it, it'll dry right out and it'll die. So you have to have a happy medium. You don't want it to dry out, but you don't want it to be drowning, because it can drown if it's just sitting in water, or getting moldy if there's not enough airflow. So what I like to do is I put it in a glass jar. Again, you'll see this in my other videos. I just put it in a glass jar with a very loose fitting lid. I just put the lid on without screwing it down, and that's enough for the airflow. And I've never failed to sprout my chestnuts. Now, I'm going to answer a question from someone long ago, because it just popped into my mind now. It fits into what I just said. Someone asked me quite a while ago about putting more than one chestnut in the same jar. There's a method to my madness there. There are several reasons. I'll give you the top two. First of all, if I've got a dozen chestnuts, I don't want to have a dozen jars in my refrigerator. I only have so much room, and my refrigerator tends to be full of food for me. So it saves space. And the other thing is, because of the very first factor that I told you about, that the smaller that the chestnut is, the lesser the likelihood that it will sprout. But again, as I said, I have done it every year. They just don't all sprout. But I always get at least one of those little ones. As long as it's swollen, it's viable. You can take that to the bank. I've got trees that did. So by putting a large one and a medium one and a small one, and if I have lots of really small ones, then put one or two small ones in there. And that way, the chances are that at most 3 will sprout. And that may seem like a lot for the same jar, but when they sprout, again, you'll see this in my other videos, they just make one taproot. That's all that they do. So there's plenty of room. You could have 5 in a small jar from jam or something, and it won't be a problem, because when you're taking them out, just fill it with water and gently pour it out, and everything will come out and it'll be beautiful. There's no problem there. But if you've got enough room, I like to do that as a rule of thumb. 3, maybe 4 in the same jar, depending on how many tiny ones I have. One year, I only had 1 tiny one, and I only had a few. I can't remember for sure, maybe 5 in total for the whole season. So I used 4 jars, and I put the tiny one in with one of the others, and the others only had 1 each. So, with that being said, I really have to get busy. The sun is starting to rise here, and I have a lot to do.